Hello and welcome to Alvercote Marina, the home of many historic and vintage canal boats, including this pair, Brighton and Nuneaton, which are owned and operated by a charity called the Narrowboat Trust. Both boats were built in the 1930s, when the Grand Union Canal Carrying Company was at its peak. The pair together carried around 50 tons of cargo in their huge holds on a route from Birmingham to London and back. Now the pair are kept going by the Trust, but it's not just about the boats as such.
The basic idea of the Narrowboat Trust is to keep working boats working and to train volunteers in the techniques that were used back in the 1930s on the working boats. You do have to be prepared to do a bit of camping, because the accommodation is 2 cabins, which usually take 1 person each, and then in the front of each boat there's a tent with a camp bed and all sorts of home comforts, but still a tent. So you have to be prepared to rough it. There isn't a shower, for instance. The water comes in containers, not out of a tap.
I'm sure you also want to know about the loo, so here it is, a portable toilet next to the engine with the paper hanging on a wire overhead. It really isn't glamorous. The galley, meanwhile, is quite well equipped considering, with a 4-burner gas hob, tea towels and matches stored overhead, plenty of options for hot and cold drinks, a cupboard and a fridge below, with pots and pans on a little shelf. But enough about the catering. The point of these boats is to work and be worked, and to keep the old canal traditions alive. It was very common 100 years ago to operate the boats in pairs.
We have 2 boats. The motor pulls the butty, which is the one nearest us. The butty was built without an engine. That gives you more hold space for your cargo. And so that is a very different steering technique, because you're having to steer much harder because you don't have an engine to make the steering work for you.
That's why the rudder on the butty is so big. With no wash from a propeller, it doesn't have much steering effect, so it's big to compensate. The motorboat has a 2-cylinder Lister diesel. Starting it is simple after some basic checks such as the oil level.
Ooh, that's a bit low.
A top-up was required.
Only a bit awkward.
Also checked is the raw water cooling for the gearbox. All kinds of muck from the canal can get lodged in here. With that out of the way, the engine can be started on the turn of a key. It has the classic, glorious ka-thump ka-thump of a low-revving lump. Keeping these boats floating and in good nick is no small undertaking, which is why the Narrowboat Trust is a charity with volunteers, and once a year they evoke the spirit of days gone by in order to raise funds.
We have a regular run every year where we sell fuel to other boaters mostly, but also we deliver to Ash Island and Eel Pie Island on the Thames, which are only accessible by boat. So that is our chief source of income. And the rest of the time we visit rallies and other events. The idea in future is also to attend more events for not for historic boats, so that we get our name out a bit more widely than we have so far.
Unsurprisingly, I'd chosen the annual fuel run as the ideal time to film, so the boats were about to set off for Braunston, where they'd load with coal. Some viewers may be perplexed and even horrified to learn that canal boats, and a fair few British houses, still use coal for heating. Well, boats which aren't connected to any shore power have no realistic options other than coal or diesel. And quite a lot of homes in the countryside here aren't connected to mains gas, which leaves oil or coal as the most cost-effective ways to keep warm in winter. They'll end up with heat pumps and so on eventually, but for the moment there's nothing better than a coal-fired stove to keep you toasty. However, this video is about narrowboats and their traditions, so let's focus on that, not the archaic nature of coal. The motorboat set off, untied from the butty so that it could draw ahead and pull the butty boat behind. They can't go side by side here, as this is the Midlands, where all of the canals, and more crucially the locks, are narrow beam, wide enough only for one boat. As the motor pulled ahead, Charlotte could grab the lines on the Butty's bow and attach them to the back of the boat. The lines Charlotte uses are just one of the many bits of rope found about the boats, and they all have specific names and uses. This is exactly the kind of thing the Trust teaches people to keep the old skills alive.
The various different pieces of rope on the boats have different names. For instance, downhill straps, snubbers, snatchers, cross straps, strings, knee strings, cabin strings, side strings, etc., etc. And sometimes when people start, they ask, well, why do we need to know all these different terms? But of course, saying to somebody when a butty's heading into a lock too fast, grab that rope, isn't a lot of help. You need to say, grab the downhill strap and put it around that bollard, and they need to know exactly what you mean. It needs to be clear. So the terms are important, and part of it is learning the new terms for everything and different ways of doing things which are like nothing else. They're completely specific to working these boats on the canals. They're nothing to do with sailing, they're nothing to do with rowing, completely different.
One of the many hazards of going along the canal, even in one large boat, let alone two strung together, is making space for oncoming craft such as here, where there's also a, quite legitimately, moored boat to account for as well. We squeezed as far over to the right as we could, but being the non-towpath side, you'll often find it's shallow, and these old working boats are deep drafted, in the order of 3 feet or so, which is about the canal's depth at best. We felt the boat scraping on the silt as we went along, but were able to steer back into the deeper centre of the channel as soon as we'd gone past the other boats. It was all expertly handled by Charlotte on Nuneaton and a volunteer who was camera shy steering Brighton at the back. The characterful heritage boats often draw interest from other boaters. With the voyage underway, which was going to take several weeks so I couldn't stay aboard, I jumped ashore, but would catch them up when they reached Braunston, heart of the canal network. There they'd take many tons of coal on board for later distribution. It's worth mentioning now, and I'll repeat it later, that the Trust is always keen to hear from people who'd like to give this a go, learning how to work the old boats in the style, manner and traditions that were once the staple of the canals. I've put a link to the Trust's website in the description below if you'd like to contact them. Off they went on an initial journey taking in 15 locks over a distance of 41 miles and 3/4 of a furlong. Yes, furlongs. This is traditional canal boating. This is the route they took, down the Coventry Canal to Hawkesbury Junction, on to the North Oxford, which goes all the way down to Braunston. They set off on a Sunday and arrived on Wednesday evening. I joined them early the next morning. I am not a morning person, but early mornings are just so lovely, I wish I was. The boats had lined up on the dockside next to the car parking area, ready for the coal lorries to arrive from a local merchant. 3 would turn up, in fact, such is the capacity of the boats, with various brands of coal bagged into 20 and 25 kilogram packs. I'm often asked, is it really coal, not charcoal? And yes, it really is, although it's not lumps of raw coal, but rather a reconstituted briquette of coal dust mixed with additives to ensure longer, slower burning and less smoke to comply with modern air quality regulations. This bit of the job is the hardest work. You need a good back, legs and arms.
Lifting out is a lot harder, especially when you get down the bottom because they're quite deep in the hold, but we do it in stages. There's usually 4 on a crew. Some aren't as fit as others, me included nowadays, but we don't do that many really heavy drops. We got 6 ton coming off in one go, but it's easy. We only have to lift it onto the side of our boat. And then the other one is a bit later on, that's a bit more. And again, our customers all help. A lot of the customers are customer friends. And they look after us and we look after them.
With about 5 or 6 bags across the boat and at least 6 layers of bags, each row equates to almost a ton of coal. The boat sits high in the water when unladen, but will easily draw 3 or 4 feet when full. The work was relentless, with the volunteers and staff from the coal merchant unloading to both boats at once. It's not entirely all coal. Some bags contain fuel logs, which are made from compressed recycled wood pellets. Halfway through the process, the galley proved its worth, as tea was made for the crew. And lest you think otherwise, the woman there in the hat is a full coal-shifting member of the crew.
The 20 kilogram bags are fine. I'm less than 5 foot tall. So today, for example, I was being handed those bags down and I was able to lift them down and manoeuvre them. And as long as you look after your back, it's absolutely fine. The challenge I have is lifting above. But again, if you've got a group of people working together, each with their own capabilities, then no, it's actually not that difficult. And over time, because I've lugged quite a few things and bags of coal amongst them recently, you do build up a technique and the muscles that go with it.
An hour and a half after starting, the final lorry load was being efficiently delivered onto narrowboat Nuneaton. But that boat became full up, and rather than move the lorry, Brighton was bow-hauled alongside. Now the last bit of space could be filled with bags, and the expedition proper could get underway. For the enthusiasts working the boats, the Narrowboat Trust provides a multitude of rewards.
The camaraderie, working with people, getting to know different people, meeting people that you don't normally meet when you're delivering fuel, in this case coal. So last year, yes, we had a group of 5 women and we worked as a team to bring the boat from one place to another, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's also, there's the techniques, there's the traditions, the customs, the fact that you're walking in the steps of those that have gone before you, because women were quite, they were in fact delivering on working boats during World War II. So the fact that you're doing that, and it is possible, you can do it, and yeah, that's what I love about it.
With the coal on board and the lorries gone, covers were put over the load and secured to keep the rain off. Some of the crew then left, their part of this trip done. Everyday work and family life mean few can stay for more than a handful of days at a time. New volunteers would arrive later that day, and the team would set off down to London. It would be a long haul, first from Braunston to Brentford, then on to Walton, Ash and Eel Pie Islands, then down the Way navigation before coming back to Walton, followed up by Reading, then onto the Kennet and Avon Canal, back towards Oxford and the Upper Thames. It was here towards the end of the run that I caught up with the crew for the final time, as they actually made one of their deliveries of coal to a house next to a lock near Lechlade. This being near the end of the trip, the holds were almost empty. There were just a few bags remaining, which would be delivered here. By and large, the trip had been a good one.
We've had good weather, all the drops, nice customers as always, no problems with the boats, worth talking about, and money in the coffers for the trust, and a good crew, good food, plenty of fun, giggles, laughs as it should be. So yeah, it all went really well.
Inevitably, another boat arrived to use the lock just as the fuel boats had paused there, since that's the best place to unload the coal. So the crew set about offloading the bags as quickly as possible. Being only a small delivery, this didn't take very long, and the wheelbarrows were brought out as well to shift the coal a couple of 100 yards to the customer. Given that many of the customers could actually get supplies by road, this whole canal delivery business might seem a bit peculiar, but the Trust thinks otherwise.
To some people now, maybe the boats don't matter as much, but to a lot of us they do, and it's very important that the reason why the canals were built and the reason why they're there in the first place is still demonstrated. And a whole cadre of skills and traditions which formed the basis of a whole way of life up to about possibly 1970, are kept going and still understood. Because when you boat the boats, and only when you boat the boats with a load on, do you realise the reason why certain things are done in the way that they are, and the reason why the canals are constructed in the way that they are.
Well, it's part of Britain's history. The Industrial Revolution wouldn't have happened without the canals, without coal, but it was the canals that carried the coal. And that history is so much a part of Britain that we just feel it's worth doing.
I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that we do it as well as people would have done it maybe 50 years ago or longer, because they would have been on such a they would have been carrying boats with far more load on, and they would have been had a much tighter time schedule, and so they would have become very, very expert. I don't think we meet that standard, but hopefully we get somewhere near to boating these in the way they were intended to be boated.
Coal aside, these locks are interesting for the paddle gear, which is a large wheel spinning easily to open and close the sluices. With the other boat waiting, the working pair began to descend. Once the lower gates were open, they could leave, but obviously not go too far, as the crew was still ashore delivering the coal. So the plan was they'd tie up on the lock landing outside, from where everyone, and the wheelbarrows, could return to the boat. Operating the lock is like any other. The lower gates were closed behind the departing boat, and the lock was refilled for the next one waiting to come down. Meanwhile, a careful reversing and going sideways manoeuvre brought Brighton and Nuneaton onto the lock landing. Without bow or stern thrusters, these boats are 90 years old after all, it's a case of lots of tiller use and throttle control. I mentioned it earlier, but the Trust are very keen on new people joining to have a go at working the boats.
People from all backgrounds, people with boats, with knowledge of the waterways, people that have never had anything to do with the waterways at all, are all welcome, and we would very much like to hear from anybody that would like to volunteer.
Lock wielding, or opening and closing gates, or steering, there's all sorts that you can do.
People who just join to support us, it's great, but people who actually want to work the boats are even better. We have some people who just like making the tea. You know, they come along for the ride, they help with the locks and they make the tea, and that's great. Tea is always useful.
As the boats manoeuvred below the lock, the wheelbarrows were being taken to the nearby house. Across a bridge, over a weir, past a very quaint cottage which is available for holiday lets from the National Trust. This may well have been the original lockkeeper's cottage. However, the coal was going next door, which I haven't shown as it's a private residence. Then, job done, back across the bridge to the boats patiently waiting below. With everything back aboard and shipshape, the lines were taken up and the boats reorganised into single file. From here they go back to Oxford and there onto the canals again for the return to their home at Alvercote. Thanks for watching. Cheerio.